Hey everyone, welcome back to a new video, and in this video we are gonna deep dive into something super exciting that's been making waves in the world of APIs, GraphQL. Imagine if you could ask for exactly what you want from your API and get it. Nothing more, nothing less. No more underfetching, no more overfetching. That's the power of GraphQL. GraphQL is a query language for your API and runtime executing those queries by using a type system that you can define for your data. Well, it's like having an assistant for your data where you can specify precisely what you want and it will simply grab that information for you. So let's do a very simple comparison of RESTful API with GraphQL. So suppose you want to fetch a bulky object in order to use only two parameters. It is our compulsion to fetch that bulky object because we are not able to fetch only two parameters that I want to use in my project. But in GraphQL, it is up to us. We can define that we only want those two parameters in our project. So it will go and grab only those two parameters from your server. So this is a plus point of GraphQL, and due to that reason, it saves us a lot of bandwidth. That's the reason why more people use GraphQL instead of RESTful APIs in order to perform queries operations. So let's get started and see how we can perform our own GraphQL operation in our Android project. First, go to the description box where you can find my initial project GitHub repository link. Download the project and open up into your Android Studio. So in this, I have already given you all the dependencies that we will use in this project. So open up your Lisp version toml file. So here you can see in the plugin section we have three plugins: Apollo, Serialization, and Dagger. So Apollo is a third-party library that we can use in order to perform the GraphQL operations. So it's a kind of retrofit but for the GraphQL. So on the top we are having lifecycle, navigation, Dagger hilt, and this is our Apollo runtime dependency. Open up your Gradle file module app level. So in the bottom we are having dependency, and on the top we are having plugins. You can see over here. Root level Gradle file contains plugins for Apollo, Kotlin serialization, and we are having Dagger plugin. So let's begin with our project. So first we have to see the endpoint that we will use in order to get the information. So this is our URL, and I will give you this link in the description box. You can copy this link from there. So the most important thing about GraphQL is schema. So schema contain all the information like what are the queries we have, what are the mutations we have, what are the subscription we have. So in GraphQL, typically we are having only three types of operation: query, mutation, and the subscription. So query is a kind of a GET request where you can ask something from your server and it will give you the response. Second is mutation. So mutation is a kind of a put, post, patch, and delete operation. You can perform this with the help of mutation. Lastly, we are having subscription. So subscription is a kind of socket. So if you want to get the real-time updates, you can use subscription. So in order to get the schema information, what we are going to do, we're going to use this endpoint and simply download that schema into our Android project so that we have a complete idea about this endpoint, what are the things it contains. So let's do that first. So go to your build Gradle KTS file, and here on the bottom just below to our Android closer, I'm gonna create here Apollo closer, and within this I'm gonna create a service, and service name would be first time. So it's up to you. If you want to give any other name, you can do it. It's not a big deal. And here I'm gonna set up my package name, but before starting setting up the package name, I'm gonna create my directory where I will put all the information. So to do that, change the mode from Android to project, and here you can see we are having app module that contains source, and source contain main folder. So I'm going to create a directory in my main folder, and I will call this a GraphQL. Okay, and this GraphQL contains few other directories in it. So it's exactly same, just we have in the Java folder. You can see Gaur, Himanshu, again GraphQL. That's it. So you can see this is our GraphQL, and after this we are having the same package structure, Gaur, Himanshu, GraphQL, and within this GraphQL I'm gonna create a file naming schema.sdl. So basically all the information goes into this file. So let's get the information from our endpoint. So go to your build Gradle KTS, and now it is time to set up our package name. Package name would be source, main, GraphQL. Okay, next we are having introspection, and within this introspection we have to use our endpoint URL. So I have already copied that thing, so simply paste over here. Next we have to give the location of our schema file. So for this we are having schema file dot set, simply use file and use the exact same location where our schema file is presented. So source, then main, then we are having a GraphQL, then Gaur, Himanshu, again GraphQL, and lastly we are having schema.sdl. Simply sync your project. Alright, so after this, go to Gradle task, and here you are seeing lot of tasks. In this task we are having Apollo, and in the Apollo you should use this download first time Apollo schema from introspection. So simply double click on it. What it will do, it will simply download the schema information in our schema.stl. Here you can see we are getting the continent type, we are getting country. So basically all the information which is present into this endpoint is populated in this file. So if you scroll down on the bottom, so here you can see query. So in query we are having continent. So suppose if you want to fetch a single continent based on the code, then you can use this query. If you want to fetch the list of continents, you can use this continents query. Similarly, we are having countries, country, language, and languages. So let's write a query, then it will make more sense. So for that, I'm going to create a GraphQL file and call this continent. And here I'm going to perform the query, and I'm going to call this continent fetching, and within this I'm going to use query continents. Now within this pair of parentheses you should specify what are the parameters you want. So from my side I'm going to use only the name parameter, because when you open this schema.stl, go to the continent. Here you can see we are having 3 parameters: code, countries, and name. So if you are using a REST API, then this 3 parameter will come to your data layer. But in this case, when you are using GraphQL, it is not the case. If you want to use only this parameter name, you can do it very easily, just like we did over here. Now I'm going to execute this query. So in order to execute this query, you can see over here this play button. Simply click on it, and here you can see I'm receiving only the name of the continent. Now if I want to receive the code, then I'm simply add the code parameter over here, click onto this button, and here you can see now I'm receiving the code too. Now I want to receive the countries which is present into this continents. So in this countries, country contain a lot of information in it. So let me show you. So go to schema.stl, and when you open up this country, here you can see we are having a lot of things: AWS region, capital, code, continent, currency, emoji, languages. So in the countries, I want to fetch the name and its flag emoji. And when you execute this query, here you can see now we are receiving the list of continents, and each continent contain a list of countries in it, and this individual country contain only its name and the emoji. So this is a way of using GraphQL, and it is more flexible. It saves a lot of bandwidth for you. So for the time being, I'm going to remove these 2 things, and I will use only the continents. And in this continent we are only having 2 parameters, name and code. Now it's time to jump on in our Android mode and begin with our project. So in the GraphQL I'm going to create 3 layers. The first layer would be a data layer, then we are having domain layer, and after that we are having presentation layer. So basically we are going to use clean architecture pattern. So due to this reason we are having here 3 different layers. Now I'm going to begin with my domain layer. So in the domain layer we are having a dependency injection package, then we are having a repository. Okay, so in the repository I'm going to create one repository naming country repository. This is an interface, and this interface contains a suspendable function get continents. Return type would be a result, and this result contain the continent fetching query dot data. So this data is eventually created by our Apollo library. So here you can see in the data we are receiving the list of continents, and when you open up this continent, here it is. We are only having 2 parameters, name and code, which we have already mentioned in our continent GraphQL query. So this is a plus point of using GraphQL, and this is a reason why most of the companies use GraphQL. Okay, so go back to your country repository. Now it's time to write its implementation. So for that, go to your data layer, and in the data layer I'm gonna again create 2 different packages, the dependency injection package and the repository implementation package. So in the repository I'm gonna create a class and call this country repo implementation, and use my country repository. Control I implement this function which is get continents. Now in order to fetch data from this GraphQL endpoint, we require Apollo client. As I told you, it's a retrofit for GraphQL. So let's create Apollo client first. So for that, go to your dependency injection package, and here I'm going to create an object naming data module. On the top we're going to use here install in singleton component. This is a module, so I'm going to use here module annotation, and within this I'm going to use singleton provide function provide Apollo client, and this will provide me Apollo client. I'm going to create a variable naming Apollo client builder, and this builder require server URL. So in place of server URL, I'm gonna use this URL because this is my endpoint. So simply copy this thing, go to your data module, paste it over here. After this, we have to use OKHTTP client. So let's create OKHTTP client on the top. So OKHTTP client. I'm gonna use its builder pattern and simply build it and pass it over here. Simply build this Apollo client and return it. Now it's time to provide the country repository implementation. So for that, I'm gonna use provide function, provide country repo. And requirement of country repository implementation would be Apollo client. So simply pass it and it will eventually return the implementation of our country repository. So return country repository implementation and pass your Apollo client. Okay, so I haven't passed Apollo client here. So now it's time to implement this function. So first I'm gonna use here try catch. So because this is a network request call, so sometimes it may throw an exception. So I'm gonna grab this thing and use result.failure and pass my exception. And within try, I'm gonna create a variable naming a response. So this response uses my Apollo client query, and in this query I'm gonna pass my query which I have already created in the continents GraphQL file. So here you can see continent fetch query. Simply use it and execute it. Okay. Now when our response.data, if it is not null, that means we are receiving data successfully. So I'm using a result.success and simply pass my data. Else if it is null, that means we are not receiving from the backend the actual data. So for that I'm using here failure and pass the exception. So exception is coming from my response.exception, and simply use a return keyword in front of try. This is our implementation. Now in our domain layer, I'm gonna create a new package which is for use cases. So in the use cases, I'm gonna create a class, and this class name would be fetch continents use case. Fetch continent use case. And the return type of this invoke function would be a flow that has a network result in it. So network result is a sealed class that we use in order to transfer our network result event. So I have used this thing in a lot of my projects, so you can simply copy paste that thing. So for that, I'm gonna create a package naming utils, and within this util I'm gonna create a file naming a network result. So this is a normal file and I'm gonna paste that thing. Continents use case, and here in place of flow I'm gonna use my network result and pass the actual data. So data would be continent fetching query dot data. Alright, so I'm gonna remove these angular braces from here. So first I'm gonna emit the loading event which is coming from our network result. Next I'm gonna use my repository. So in order to use my repository, I'm gonna pass that thing in my constructor. So here we are having country repository wall response, and I'm gonna use my country repository dot get continents. So if our response is success, then only I'm gonna emit network result dot success, and in this success we're gonna pass the data. So data is coming from our response dot get or throw. Else if it is a error case, I'm gonna simply emit network result dot error and pass my response exception or null message. So in the catch I'm gonna use again my emit function that emit network result dot error, and in place of message I'm gonna use my exception message. So this is my use case. So we are pretty much done with our data layer and domain layer. So let's begin with our presentation layer. So in the presentation layer, I'm gonna create a package. So the first package would be continents. And in this continents, I'm gonna create a view model naming continents view model. So this is a file, and I'm gonna use this template. In this view model, I'm gonna pass my use case, which is private val fetch continent use case. We have init block here, and just below to it, I'm gonna create a function get continents. Use my fetch continent use case, invoke it, and simply use on each. And ultimately, I'm gonna launch this thing into my view model scope. And in order to manage state in our composable screen, I'm gonna create an object and call this continent screen. And within this, I'm having one data class and call this UI state that contain is loading boolean, which is initially false. Next we are having error message, it's a string, empty. Lastly we are having data, which is continent fetching query dot data, and initially this will be null. So on the top I'm gonna create UI state naming state flow. So initialize this thing with the help of mutable state flow, and the initial value is coming from my content screen dot UI state. Then we are having UI state. So this state flow is actually used to expose this private while UI state. So here we are having state flow. Type would be again content screen dot UI state, and I'm gonna use my top UI state and convert this thing into state flow. So here I'm gonna use network result. So when our network result, so I'm gonna use this suggestion. So when it is a case of error, I'm gonna use my UI state and update my state with the help of UI state. In place of error, I'm gonna pass the message. So this message is coming from my network result dot message. Simply convert this thing into string. So this is a case of error. Similarly, if it is a case of loading, I'm gonna use a UI state, simply update it, continent screen dot UI state, and in place of is loading you can pass through. And when we're receiving the data from GraphQL endpoint, on that scenario I'm gonna update this thing with continent screen dot UI state, and in place of data I'm gonna use the network result dot data. So that's the implementation for our view model. Now I'm gonna use this get continent in my init block. So now it's time to design my screen. So right click onto my continent package, and I'm gonna create continent screen and simply create a composable for that. Within this we require our view model. So let's pass my view model, and I'm gonna create a UI state which is ultimately initialized from our continent view model dot UI state. So collect this thing as state. So if our UI state is loading is true, then I'm gonna create a box having modifier fill max size content alignment on the center, not center end, it's center. And within this I'm gonna use circular progress indicator. So if our UI state error is not empty, on that case I'm gonna create box modifier fill max size and its content alignment on the center, and within this I'm gonna use text in order to show the error message. So UI state error, simply use toString. Alright, so this is the case for our error. So loading is done, error is done. Now it's time to use the actual success case. So UI state data, if it is not null, that means we are receiving the data. So data has data that contain list of continents. So I wanna access that list. So in this data we are having continents, and I'm gonna access that continent. Okay, so within this I'm gonna use lazy column, and this lazy column has modifier fill max size, and within this lazy column we are having items. So use the items that has a list in it, simply pass your list and render your item one by one. So for the item I'm gonna create a card. So card has modifier fill max width, and here we are having text, and this text eventually used to show the name. I'm using a style over here which is coming from my material theme typography. Headline small is good, and after that I'm gonna use modifier and use padding 12 dp. Let me import this dp thing. Alright, so that's it for my continent screen. Now I'm gonna use this continent screen in my main activity. So here in place of greetings I'm gonna use my continent screen. I'm gonna wrap this thing with surface and use this inner padding in my surface. So modifier padding, pass your inner padding, and simply cut this screen from this place and paste it in the surface. Acquire the continents view model. So continents view model you can create on the top. Hilt view model, pass your continent view model in this screen. Alright, so we are pretty much done with our presentation layer. Now it's time to set up our dagger hilt. So to do that I'm gonna create a class and call this base application. This is a class, and this class extend with the application, and on the top we are having hilt Android app. Now we are gonna register this class name into my manifest. name base application. And one more thing, because this is a network request call, so you have to use the internet permission. Alright, so in the main activity I have forgot to add @Android entry point. So let's do that. Okay, here you can see this is a loading case, and now we are receiving the continent list: Africa, Antarctica, Asia, Europe, North America, Oceania, and South America. Now I'm going to provide some padding to our cards. So to do that, go to your continent screen, and on the bottom we are having card, and simply just before this fill max width, I'm going to use padding 8 dp. Now when you execute this application one more time, here you can see this is our list of continents. Now I'm gonna introduce one more feature. So when you click any of the item, you're gonna see the continent name with all the countries present in it. So in order to get the continent details, we have to write a different GraphQL file, or you can say different query. So change your mode from Android to project, and here I'm gonna create a new GraphQL file naming fetch continent details. So fetch underscore continent details. And in this I'm going to create a query naming fetch details. We should require code, and the type of code is id, which is not null. And here I'm going to use the continent, and in place of code I'm going to simply pass my code. So the response body that I expect from this query is name, and then we are expecting the list of countries that has name and its emoji and the languages. So this language has name in it, so I'm gonna use all of these details, country details, from this query. So now go back to your domain layer repository interface, and here I'm gonna create one more function, so which is suspend function get continent details, and simply pass the code, which is type of string. Return type would be same, which is a result, and here we are having fetch details query dot data. Now I'm gonna implement this thing. So go to your data layer repository, simply implement this function, start implementing the function. So first we are having try, then we are having catch, having exception. So when we receive exception, I'm gonna use a result failure and pass the exception. On the top I'm gonna use a response variable Apollo client dot query, and the query is fetch details query. Executed. So the requirement of this query would be code. So simply pass your code, which we will receiving from this get continent detail function. So when our response dot data dot continent is not null, then I'm gonna use my result dot success and simply pass it. Else, if we are receiving null or found any error, then on that scenario I'm gonna use a result dot failure and use my response dot exception, and I'm assuming this is not null. Use a return keyword in front of try. Alright, so I have problem here. So problem is requirement is fetch detail query. Okay, so here I'm using continent, so this is a wrong. So remove this thing. Now it will work. Go back to your use case, and here I'm gonna create a new use case, which is fetch continent details. This is a file and I'm using my template over here, so due to this reason it's very easy for me. So fetch continents use case, and the return type of this flow would be network result, and within this we are having fetch detail query dot data. Alright, so requirement of this constructor would be our country repository. So first I'm gonna emit the network result loading. Then I'm gonna create a variable naming a response, which eventually use my country repository get continent details and pass the code. So in order to use this code, I'm gonna create a parameter here. Now I will pass it. So when it is a case of, so if our response is success, then on that case I'm gonna emit the network success and simply pass the data. So a response get or throw. Else I'm gonna emit here network result error and simply pass message. So message is coming from my response dot exception or null message. And if anything else goes wrong, I'm gonna use emit network result error and pass the message. So this is the implementation for our fetch continents use case. Go to your presentation layer, and in this presentation layer I'm gonna create a new package for the details, and here we are having two different things. The first one is view model, so I'm gonna call this fetch details view model. So this is a file and I'm gonna use my template fetch details view model. So in the constructor, I'm gonna pass my use case, which is fetch detail use case. Now I'm gonna create an object which is naming fetch details, and within this we are having a data class which is used to store the UI state. So the first parameter would be is loading, type is boolean, I'm gonna call this fall. Next we are having error, type is string, and initial value would be empty. Then we are having data. So the type of data would be fetch details query dot data, and initial value would be null. In the view model, I am gonna create UI state naming variable which is a mutable state flow, and initial value would be fetch detail dot UI state. And just below to it, I'm having one more UI state flow, and the type would be fetch detail dot UI state. Use the UI state which is a private one and use as state flow. This view model contain one function which is fetch details and pass your code, which is a type of string, and I'm gonna use the fetch continents use case, invoke it, pass my code. On each emission, I'm gonna use here a network result. When our network result is a type of these three, error, loading, success, I'm gonna update my UI state accordingly. So UI state update, so it's a error case, so I'm gonna use here UI state which is coming from my package, and I'm gonna pass the error which is coming from my network result message. Use toString. In case of loading, I'm gonna use UI state update fetch detail UI state and pass is loading true. So in case of success, I'm gonna use UI state update it with the help of fetch detail UI state. In place of data, you can pass the network result dot data. So this is the logic for updation our UI state, and I'm gonna launch this thing in our view model scope. Alright, so we are pretty much done with our fetch detail view model. Now I'm gonna create a screen for this. So for that, here we are having fetch details file. This file contain a composable naming fetch details, and the requirement of fetch detail would be our view model, which is fetch details view model. On the top we are having UI state which is initialized with the help of fetch detail view model dot UI state, and I'm gonna collect this thing as state which is aware with our life cycle. Alright, so I'm gonna use the same thing. So instead of writing those things again, I'm gonna simply copy these two things from here. Simply copy this, come back to your fetch detail and paste it over here. So now let's tackle the success case. So UI state data that contain continent in it if it is not null, and I'm gonna rename this thing with continent. Okay, in this scenario I'm gonna create a column having modifier fill max size, and within this we are having text. So the first text is eventually used to show the continent, so continent dot name, and in place of style I'm gonna use here material theme typography. Headline large is fine. Alright, now within this I'm gonna use my continent and use countries, and I'm gonna use here I'm using for each loop, and within this I'm having text that will show the country name, and in place of style I'm gonna use here material theme typography headline small. So yeah, that's it for our detail screen. Now it's time to set up our navigation. So to set up our navigation in the presentation, I'm gonna create a package, and the package name would be navigation, and in this navigation I'm gonna create a file which is main navigation. Here we are having composable naming main navigation which has nav host. So requirement is nav controller, so I'm gonna create my nav controller with the help of remember nav controller and simply pass it over here. In place of graph I'm gonna use start destination. Now it's time to create few destinations. So for that I'm having shield class naming dest, and within this we are having two different destinations. So the first destination would be a data object, our home, I mean the continent list screen, and eventually it will extend the destination. Second, we are having its details which is extend the dest. So in order to use these two things as a destination, you can make this two object serializable and make sure to use serializable on the top of our shield class. Now you can pass the start destination which is coming from my test.home, And here we are having composable, so use the composable, and in place of this angular braces you can pass the destination. So first destination would be our home, and in case of home I'm gonna use my continent screen and simply pass my continents view model. So for that I'm gonna create this view model over here. Hilt view model type would be continent view models and pass it over here. Next we are having dest.details. So in case of detail I'm gonna change this data object into data class and pass my code, which is a type of string. Make sure to use while here. Now I'm gonna use my detail screen here. So fetch detail, requirement is view model, so let's create view model, pass it. Alright, so now when user click any of the item, then we will navigate to destination details with the code. So go to your continent screen, and here I'm gonna introduce on click event. So on click input would be string and the output is unit. So scroll down in the card, I'm gonna attach my clickable event on click dot invoke and simply use the it dot code. Alright, so now go to your main navigation, and here I'm gonna capture that code. And after that I'm using a nav controller navigate, simply use a dest.details and pass my code, which is coming in a form of it. Alright, so now it's time to extract this argument here. So to do that I'm gonna use a variable name code and simply it dot to route. You can pass the destination details and simply grab the code from this destination details. And after that I'm gonna use a launch effect. So if our code is changed, then only I'm gonna use my view model and simply hit my fetch detail with the code. Alright, so this is a complete implementation of our navigation. Now I'm gonna use this main navigation in my main activity. Instead of this I'm gonna use main navigation, simply import it and remove this view model. Alright, so now it's time to execute it. So here you can see on the top we are having the continent name, and just below to it we are having countries that is present into this continent. So yeah, this is a complete video how to use GraphQL. So if you like this video, subscribe this channel and also write comments if you are facing any problems regarding the setup or anything else. I hope you like this video. We will meet in our next video where we will discuss something new and related to Android development. Till that, goodbye.